December 11th, 1998. Earth orbit. Mission STS-88. A photograph is taken by an astronaut. Inside the frame, the Earth. Above it, a black silhouette. Irregular, silent, out of place. For NASA, it was just debris. A thermal blanket lost during the mission. But for many people, that explanation was not enough, because that silhouette seemed to give a face to a much older story. A story made of unexplained signals, suspicious radio echoes, dark objects reported in orbit, and the possibility that something had been watching the Earth long before the space age. This is the story of an alleged satellite of unknown origin. A dark machine. A presence that, according to some, may never have truly disappeared. Did it ever really exist? And if it did, is it still out there today? Its name became legend. The Black Knight. To follow this phenomenon, we do not begin with NASA. We have to go back, much further back. Before Sputnik, before military radar, before Earth's orbit became human territory. At the end of 1899, Nikola Tesla was in Colorado Springs. His laboratory was not an ordinary place. It was a room filled with electrical discharges, coils, receivers, antennas, and instruments built to hear what others could not. Outside, Colorado was cold and silent. Tesla was searching for signals, impulses in the noise. Then something repeated, not once, several times. And for Tesla, that repetition was the most unsettling detail. It did not seem random. Maybe it came from Mars. Maybe from another civilization. Maybe from someone trying to communicate across space. Tesla never spoke of Black Knight. He never described a dark satellite. He never claimed to have found a machine in orbit. But he left behind a possibility. The possibility that something above the Earth could be transmitting. And this is the first trace. Not the object, its possible signal. Almost 30 years later, the sky returned something. In 1927, in Norway, the radio amateur Jørgen Hals was listening to radio signals coming from the Netherlands. The main signal arrived clearly. Then came the expected echo. And after the silence, an unusual second return. Weaker, more distant, delayed by several seconds. It was not the echo Hals expected. It came too late, too isolated. As if the signal had touched something out there, at a point no one could see, and had been sent back. The phenomenon was called a long-delayed echo, a radio echo, delayed over time. Science searched for natural explanations. The ionosphere, unusual reflections, effects still not fully understood. But for those searching for the Black Knight, those echoes contained a different question. What if they were not simple radio reflections? What if something was sending them back? What if, above the Earth, there really was an object capable of intercepting our signals, or filtering them? Tesla had left behind the idea of a transmission. Hals left behind the idea of a response, a signal that returns from a point no one can see. For decades, those echoes remained suspended between science and anomaly. Then, in 1973, the Scottish writer Duncan Lunan returned to those old data. But instead of filing them away as radio anomalies, he tried to read them as a message. Times, delays, sequences. And in those numbers, he believed he saw something. According to his interpretation, those delays could form a star map. A map pointing toward Epsilon Boötis, a star in the constellation Boötes. But the most shocking detail was not the star. According to that reading, the alleged object connected to the message had arrived near Earth thousands of years ago. About 13,000 years ago. Before cities, before writing, before the pyramids. If this interpretation had been true, the Black Knight would not have been a modern satellite. It would not have been Soviet. It would not have been American. It would have been something far more unsettling and beyond our control. An ancient probe, a machine sent by an unknown civilization, an observer in orbit around Earth since time immemorial. But something in that theory began to crack. Lunan later distanced himself from his own interpretation. He acknowledged that the data were fragile, that some reconstructions did not hold, that the alleged map could have been the result of an interpretation pushed too far. We do not know whether for him it was simply an intellectual correction or the weight of having gone too far. But from that moment on, his theory was no longer a certainty. It became something more fragile, and precisely because of that, easier to turn into legend. For many, this should have closed the case, but it did not. Because even after removing the map, the central idea remained: an unknown object, a possible probe. An invisible point from which terrestrial radio signals seemed to return. Who was its creator? What was its purpose? Then the world entered the age of satellites, and suddenly the Black Knight was no longer just a radio hypothesis. It could become a trackable object. After the launch of Sputnik, Earth's orbit was no longer an abstract place. It became a military space, a monitored territory, a field where the United States and the Soviet Union watched each other without pause. Radar, rockets, telemetry, spy satellites, secrets. In those years, any unidentified object in orbit could be a threat. It did not need to be alien. It was enough that no one knew who it belonged to. In 1960, several reports spoke of a dark object detected in Earth orbit, a mysterious body, perhaps a Soviet satellite, perhaps a piece of wreckage, perhaps something that for a moment no one could classify. And in that moment, the myth found a new body. No longer just signals, no longer just echoes, an object. Then came a more concrete explanation. The alleged dark satellite was linked to remnants of the Discoverer program. Human, not alien. For many, the case ended there. A piece of space wreckage, a misidentification, a fragment of the space race. But for the legend, that explanation was not enough. Because the Black Knight was no longer tied to a single sighting, it had become a name. A name given to anything that appeared in orbit without an immediate explanation. And every time an object was explained, archived, or forgotten, a more unsettling possibility remained. That those were only false clues, and that the real object had never been identified. And so we return to 1998. The Space Shuttle Endeavour is in orbit. The Earth moves beneath the shuttle. The astronauts document the mission. Then the silhouette appears. Black, twisted, too strange, too perfect not to become legend. In the photographs, it seems to change shape. At times, it looks like a folded sheet. At times, a fragment. At times, something more solid. A dark body suspended above the planet, as if it had been caught for an instant before disappearing again. The official version is clear. During the mission, a thermal blanket was lost. The object was catalogued as debris. According to this reconstruction, it re-entered the atmosphere a few days later and disintegrated. And so, if that explanation is correct, the Black Knight photographed in 1998 no longer exists. But it is precisely here that the mystery changes shape. Because those who believe in the legend can answer in only one way. That was not the real Black Knight. It was only the wrong image, the false body, the human fragment that covered the trace of something older. And if that is true, then the question is no longer, what was the object in the photograph? The question becomes, where is the real object? There are two overlapping stories. The first is the documented one. A piece of debris photographed in 1998. Radio echoes difficult to interpret. Old hypotheses later reduced in strength. Cold War objects mistaken for something more mysterious. The second is the one without a clear ending. A dark satellite in polar orbit, an object belonging to no known nation on Earth. A probe, perhaps, arrived thousands of years before the space age. An observer capable of remaining hidden through the ages, while humanity built cities, wars, antennas, rockets, and orbital stations. The first story searches for explanations. The second leaves a question. If the Black Knight were real, how would we recognize it? It would not need to come closer. It would not need to communicate openly. It would not need to show itself. It would only need to remain there, outside the point where we are looking, outside public catalogs, outside the orbits we are used to tracking. An ancient object would not have to behave like a human satellite. It would not have to seek energy as we do. It would not have to transmit as we do. It would not even have to look as if it had been designed according to our shapes. And perhaps that is exactly what makes the 1998 photograph so difficult to forget. Because even if it was only debris, it looked exactly like what the legend had been waiting for. A black body, an irregular profile, a presence above the Earth. So the most important question remains: is the Black Knight still in orbit today? If we are talking about the object photographed during STS-88, the official answer is no. That object would have re-entered the atmosphere shortly afterward. But if we are talking about the Black Knight of the legend, then no one can point to a precise location in the sky and say, there it is. No one can show a verifiable orbital track. No one can present a continuous signal. No one can prove that an ancient probe is watching the Earth. But for those who believe in the legend, the absence of definitive proof is not enough to close the case. Because if a machine had been built to observe a rising civilization, if it had been sent by a culture older than our history, if it had crossed millennia without being recognized, then perhaps it would not be easy for us to find. Perhaps it would not be where we expected. Perhaps it would not have an obvious radar signature. Perhaps it would not even still be in low Earth orbit. Perhaps the 1998 photograph is not the proof. Perhaps it is only the mistake that made us look in the right direction. A signal in 1899, an echo in 1927, a map in 1973, a dark object during the Cold War, a photograph in 1998. Each piece on its own can be explained. It can be reduced. It can be archived. But placed one after another, they form a trail. Not proof, a trail. And perhaps this is how a hidden object moves through history, never appearing long enough to be captured, never disappearing long enough to be forgotten, only leaving traces. The Black Knight may never have existed. It may be an error born from the union of different phenomena, a name given to signals, debris, wreckage, and fears. Or it may have truly existed, an ancient object, a probe, a silent machine, something sent here by a civilization that knew the Earth thousands of years before we could even realize it. And if it is still out there, then perhaps the problem is not that we have not found it. Perhaps the problem is that we have already seen it, and we called it debris. Black Knight satellite, the dark satellite, a photograph, an object, a question in orbit. And perhaps somewhere above the Earth, a black silhouette is still moving through the darkness without making a sound.